Good morning, dear listener. Tonight we open the pages of a story that sweeps you into the shadows of Paris, a tale of blood, secrets, and symbols older than any cathedral stone. The city lies hushed beneath its midnight veil, the river Seine whispering softly as its waters slide past centuries of history. Above, the glass pyramid of the Louvre glows faintly in the dark, a lantern guarding countless treasures of human genius. Yet within its galleries, where silence is supposed to honor art, a cry has just been choked into silence. Jacques Saunière, the venerable curator, stumbles beneath the cold, watchful eyes of Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. His breath rasps, his chest burns. A shot has pierced him, delivered by a man of merciless faith who believes he is serving the will of God. Blood pools beneath Saunière's feet, but it is not only fear that drives him, it is urgency. His killer has demanded knowledge, secrets only he and a dwindling brotherhood carry. Secrets Saunière will never surrender. Shaking, he turns his mind to a single thought. He must protect the Grail. If he dies without passing on the path, centuries of guardianship will vanish in smoke. In desperation, he drags himself across the gleaming marble floor, fingers fumbling for a marker, his body a human compass pointing toward salvation. He knows he has minutes, perhaps less. With trembling strokes, he sketches symbols in his own blood, arranging his body in a posture meant to speak when his voice no longer can. It is a code, a final testament hidden in plain sight. Elsewhere in Paris, Robert Langdon stirs from uneasy rest. The Harvard professor, tall, graying at the temples, is in the city for a lecture on symbology. To him, the night feels ordinary, until a sharp knock at his hotel door disrupts the calm. A French police captain, grave-faced, tells him he is urgently needed at the Louvre. Langdon assumes some scholarly consultation, perhaps on ancient symbols adorning a forgotten canvas. He cannot guess the accusation waiting for him, nor the deadly chase about to ensnare his life. Inside the Louvre's grand halls, the air is heavy with tension. Police swarm, their radios crackling, their boots echoing. Langdon is ushered in, his eyes catching the strange sight of barriers erected around Da Vinci's masterpieces. Then he sees it. The curator's body splayed grotesquely upon the floor, limbs outstretched like a man inside a circle and square. Beside him, a trail of riddles, cryptic numbers, invisible ink glowing under ultraviolet light, and a name, Robert Langdon. The shock ripples through him. His own name, scrawled in dying blood, condemns him in the eyes of the police. Captain Bezoufache watches him with hawk-like suspicion, convinced Langdon is no expert consultant but a suspect. The walls of history seem to close around Langdon, suffocating. He feels the weight of centuries pressing on him, as if every symbol on every painting in the Louvre has turned its gaze upon him. But just as the net tightens, salvation arrives in the form of Sophie Neveu, a young cryptographer with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She is Saunière's granddaughter, though she has not spoken of their kinship aloud. Approaching Langdon discreetly, she slips him a warning. He is in grave danger. The police are ready to arrest him. Her voice, urgent and steady, cuts through his panic. She urges him to trust her, and together they weave an escape through the labyrinthine corridors of the museum. As alarms shriek and red lights flash against gilded frames, Langdon and Sophie dart into the Parisian night. Behind them lies a corpse that has become a riddle. Ahead of them, a chase that will test their faith, courage, and the very roots of their identities. For within Saunière's final gestures lies not only a key to an ancient mystery, but a summons to unravel a conspiracy stretching from secret brotherhoods to the heart of the church itself. The city around them is unaware. Lovers linger along the Seine, oblivious to the storm gathering above their heads. Taxi lights glimmer, cafes glow with warmth, and Notre Dame stands eternal against the sky. Yet in the alleys and shadows, a different Paris stirs, A Paris of hidden codes and ancient guardians where truth is both weapon and salvation. And so begins the journey with a single man's sacrifice and a single message written in blood. A journey that will take Langdon and Sophie from the heart of Paris to forgotten cathedrals, from dusty manuscripts to revelations that could shake the pillars of faith itself. The Grail is not just legend, it is alive in the shadows of history. And tonight its guardians call out through riddles and sacrifice. The night air of Paris clings heavy to your skin as Sophie guides Robert Langdon through narrow side streets, her pace quick and calculated. She moves like someone who has lived her life in a world of codes, seeing patterns where others see chaos, reading danger in every shadow. Langdon struggles to keep up, his mind torn between shock and disbelief. Only an hour ago he was a professor with a scheduled flight back to Boston. Now, he is a fugitive. Sophie pulls him into the glow of a small cafe. The hum of late-night conversations and clinking glasses offers a strange kind of camouflage. She leans close, her voice low but steady. "I need you to trust me. My grandfather left a message only I could recognize. He wanted me to find you." Her words, sharp and urgent, slice through the confusion swirling around Langdon. Why him? Why this professor of symbols? Then she shows him something the police never saw. From her jacket pocket, Sophie produces a small slip of paper she discreetly recovered at the crime scene. It contains a hidden message written in a code only she and her grandfather once shared. As Langdon studies the symbols, a realization dawns. Saunière's dying act was not an accusation, it was an invitation. Langdon's thoughts leap from one possibility to another. He recalls Saunière's reputation in art circles, whispers that the curator was more than a guardian of paintings, that he belonged to a shadowy brotherhood known as the Priory of Sion, a group said to protect the greatest secret in Christendom. But secrets this dangerous draw enemies like moths to flame. The albino monk flashes across his mind, a pale ghost of violence who seemed less man and more relentless force. Their conversation is cut short by sirens wailing in the distance. The police are closing in. Sophie wastes no time. She leads Langdon out the cafe's back door and into the alleyways where the glow of street lamps bends like molten gold on cobblestones. She has a plan, but it demands courage. They must return to Saunière's apartment. If her grandfather left a final trail, it will be there. The apartment is a strange paradox, both intimate and secretive. Antique books line the walls, their spines whispering of centuries past. Religious iconography and Renaissance sketches mingle in careful chaos. Sophie moves with reverence, her eyes scanning, her fingers brushing objects as though she is searching for her grandfather's very heartbeat. Then she finds it. A hollowed-out keystone hidden behind a framed sketch of Da Vinci. The keystone is not an ordinary stone but a cryptex, a cylindrical device locked with letters invented by Da Vinci himself to protect secrets. Inside, legend says, lies the map to the Holy Grail. Langdon, scholar of symbols, feels awe ripple through him. History is no longer theory. It is in his hands. But awe quickly hardens into dread. If they possess the cryptex, they also carry a death sentence. Whoever killed Saunière will not stop until it is theirs. Meanwhile, in another chamber of Paris, the hunter kneels. Silas, the albino monk, prays with fervent intensity, his voice quivering as if every syllable binds him tighter to his master. He believes his violence is holy, that his scourge of flesh and his merciless obedience cleanse his soul. Behind him looms the unseen figure of the teacher, a mastermind hidden in shadows, weaving pawns across the board of Europe. To the teacher, Saunière's death is only the first move. Back in the apartment, Langdon and Sophie's escape is nearly cut off. Sirens echo closer, blue lights flashing against the window glass. They have moments, perhaps seconds. Sophie thrusts the cryptex into Langdon's hands, her eyes burning with the same intensity her grandfather once carried. "We can't let them take it. Whatever happens, this must stay secret." They flee again into the night, chased not just by police but by history itself. Paris, with its centuries-old architecture and whispering stones, seems alive with secrets. Statues stare from rooftops, gargoyles leer from cathedrals, and every corner feels like a page from a coded manuscript. Langdon realizes with chilling clarity that Saunière has placed them at the center of a puzzle larger than either of them can comprehend. And as dawn begins to glow faintly on the horizon, Paris looks less like a city of romance and more like a labyrinth where truth and death walk hand in hand. They don't run blindly. They move with purpose, slipping through the thinning darkness as the first pale wash of morning climbs the Paris rooftops. The city's breath slows. Cleaning trucks hiss along the curbs, the scent of soap and diesel mixing with cold air. Sophie keeps glancing not at the street behind them but at Robert's jacket, her mind grinding through a different kind of chase, the kind made of ciphers. At the curb she stops abruptly, fingers quick as a watchmaker's. "Hold still." She turns his lapel, then the hem, then the inner pocket, searching with the certainty of someone who has seen this trick before. There, a smooth, adhesive dot, no larger than a lentil, a tracker. She peels it free without ceremony, and as a delivery lorry rumbles past, flicks the device so it lands atop the truck's rear bumper, clinging like a barnacle. The vehicle glides away toward the périphérique. Somewhere in a surveillance van, a room full of red pins will start to migrate rapidly out of the city, chasing a ghost. Robert exhales, a sharp sound of relief cut with dread. If the police were certain enough to tag him, then their time is thinner than dawn. In the shelter of a shuttered arcade, Sophie pulls a folded sheet from her jacket. Photographs of the dying messages captured in the museum's ultraviolet bloom. She doesn't need the images, they live behind her eyes. But spreading them between them on the stone, she lets Robert see what she sees. The numbers first, a sequence almost right, almost elegant, until you realize the elegance is hidden in the act of correction itself. Reorder them and a famous spiral returns to life. The mathematician's rising staircase that governed seashells and stars. "Not a code meant to lock them out," she says softly, but a handshake meant to tell her who was speaking. Her grandfather had taught her that spiral when she was a child, the way other families taught prayers. The letters next, scrambled, jagged, taunting. Anagrams, another private language from those long ago evenings at Saunière's table when riddles were dessert. Move the letters and two names spill free, each pointing to a work by the same master whose presence had watched over the dying man. Not a message to the police, a summons to Sophie, to her alone. Robert listens with the alert stillness of a man who spends his life coaxing meaning from ancient bones of ink. He can feel the dead curator's cunning in the choice, the spiral as signature, the scrambled names as a breadcrumb trail through Da Vinci's gaze. He remembers the murdered body arranged like a man inside sacred geometry. He remembers the wordless plea such symbols can carry across centuries. Look closer. They cannot go back to the museum. But the works the anagrams allude to exist beyond that single building. There are reproductions, notes, histories, more breadcrumbs lying in wait. And Sophie's certainty cuts through the fog. Her grandfather is not pointing to a single painting, but to a vault of knowledge, a lifetime in the making. The man who raised her had never wasted a puzzle. Every riddle was a bridge. They slip into a quiet side street where an old bookseller is raising his gate, the rasp of metal loud in the hush. Inside the cramped shop, the scent of dust and linen paper wraps them like an embrace. The proprietor barely glances up as Sophie moves with surgical focus through art monographs and symbology atlases. Pulling the volume she knows will carry exactly the diagrams she needs. At a small reading table under a green-shaded lamp, the world narrows to paper and breath. They work together without declaring it. Robert maps the symbolic terrain, how the spiral and the square bleed into Renaissance obsessions with proportion and hidden harmonies, how secret societies wrapped their hearts in metaphor when the world grew too violent for plain speech. Sophie navigates the pathways her grandfather taught her to walk alone. She remembers a girl's hands shuffling letter tiles, a man's patient voice. Codes are like people, ma chérie. When you rearrange their masks, you see what they were hiding. Her voice falters only once. When memory veers to the night everything broke. She had returned home unexpectedly and seen something she could not absorb. Hooded figures in a circle, a ritual that felt older than language, flesh and light braided in a choreography that made her throat close. She had run, slammed a door, built a wall that lasted years. Her grandfather's calls went unanswered, his letters unopened. Now the letters have returned, but written in blood, asking her to trust him as if that night had not shattered trust at its root. Robert hears the grief threading her words, and something gentle moves behind his eyes. He does not press. He knows belief and betrayal often wear the same cloak in the half-light. Instead, he follows the path she has reopened. Da Vinci's women, Da Vinci's rocks, the painter's habit of hiding conversations inside brushstrokes. The first scrambled name points toward a famous smile, enigmatic as a locked door. The second toward a Madonna whose landscape hoards caverns and crevices like a map folded upon itself. Hidden there in that geology is the habit of concealment itself. Sophie's hand lifts to her own throat, as if steadying something delicate inside. He's telling us to look behind. She doesn't mean literally, not only. She means within the frame of stories, beneath the varnish of official truths, but also, perhaps literally. Her grandfather had delighted in concealment so material you could hold their cleverness in your palm. A memory blinks on. A childhood scavenger hunt he designed through their apartment, where behind never meant only behind the obvious thing. It meant behind the idea of the thing. Behind assumptions. The lamp hums softly as Robert turns a page to a diagram of a cylindrical device sketched in a notebook attributed to the master whose name keeps returning like a bell. A cryptex. He'd lectured on it countless times. A stone-like cylinder of interlocking discs, letters rotating on a spine. Inside, a fragile capsule would guard a folded message. Try to pry or smash it, and a vial would break, spilling dissolving liquid to devour the text. The only path to truth is the right word. He reaches into his jacket where the weight has felt strange since the apartment. Heavy in the way a secret is heavy. The device he and Sophie lifted from her grandfather's hiding place answers the diagram like a mirror. No longer myth, artifact. The stakes harden in the space between them. This is not just a map. It is a lock that punishes force with loss. What word did he give us? Robert asks, though he suspects the answer is not a single word but a journey of them strung like beads through Europe. Sophie traces the ridges of the discs with the pad of her thumb as if the metal might warm into speech. He gave us me, she says, almost a whisper. He gave us everything he ever taught me about how to read him. Outside, a police siren groans and then fades. The bookseller coughs delicately, glances once at the strange cylinder on their table, and decides the morning requires discretion. Robert closes the monograph and feels the city's pressure return. Whatever sanctuary this lamp pool offers will evaporate in minutes. They need a place where they can think without the knock at the door. They need someone who knows the lore so intimately that rumor becomes scholarship, myth becomes footnote. A name surfaces between them like a coin rising through water. An eccentric knight of libraries. A scholar who has turned his countryside manor into an ark for banned questions. If anyone can thread these symbols into a rope strong enough to climb, it is he. But inviting another player onto the board is its own gamble. Allies can be cathedrals or traps. Sophie folds the photographs, tucks them close to her heart, and lifts the cryptex with a tenderness that looks like defiance. "He wanted me to keep this safe," she says. "Not from the police. From the people who think they serve God by destroying whatever scares them." Robert nods. He thinks of the pale man kneeling in a dim chapel, of lashes and whispers, of a faceless voice that moves men like chess pieces in the dark. He thinks of power wearing righteousness like armor, of how often fear calls itself faith. The secret inside their cylinder is old enough to have frightened kings. They step back onto the waking street. Daylight is pooling now in the gutters, turning puddles into thin silver. Somewhere to the west, across a sleeve of water and a narrow border, stands a house where answers might begin to gather. Between here and there lies everything trying to stop them. Police with their laws, zealots with their scars, and the unsteadiness of two people learning to trust each other while carrying a secret that can dissolve if you hold it too tightly. The city loosens its grip as they move, but the story tightens. The word they need is not yet on their tongues. Yet the path, spiral, smile, stone, has been drawn. And as they turn the corner toward a waiting car and a road that will lead them out of Paris, the morning light skims the cryptex and makes it gleam like a promise that will either save them or vanish the moment they force it. The car engine hums low as they leave Paris behind, headlights cutting across the damp gray of morning fields. For the first time since the Louvre, Robert has a moment to breathe. The blur of cathedrals, riddles, and blood begins to stitch into a pattern, one that frightens him as much as it fascinates him. Sophie sits in silence beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon, the cryptex clutched tightly in her lap like a fragile child. Every now and then her fingers trace its carved discs, as though by touch alone she might summon the word that will open it. Yet peace is an illusion. Even as they flee, another shadow moves across France. Silas, the albino monk, kneels in a candlelit chamber, his body scarred from acts of penance, his mind sharpened by fanatic obedience. He whispers prayers that sound like vows of war. To him, this quest is not a pursuit of history. It is a holy mission. His master, the one he calls teacher, has promised that the Grail will be found, that the lies of centuries will be crushed. Silas rises from the floor, his pale eyes gleaming with purpose. Somewhere on the road ahead, he knows the fugitives are carrying the keystone, and God has chosen him as their scourge. Back in the car, Sophie finally breaks the silence. "You don't know him like I did," she says softly, her eyes still on the fields racing past. "My grandfather never did anything without layers. What we've seen is only the surface. He's left us more." Her voice quivers between grief and determination, and Robert hears in it the echo of a little girl who once solved puzzles at her grandfather's knee. The thought strengthens him. Whatever danger lies ahead, they are not just running. They are following a path Saunière carved deliberately with his last breath. The countryside soon yields to the silhouette of Gothic towers. They are approaching one of the ancient cathedrals Saunière once took Sophie to as a child, a place whose very stones hum with forgotten meanings. Inside, the cavernous vault is thick with shadows, the faint scent of incense clinging to the air. Stained glass windows fracture morning light into shards of crimson and sapphire across the stone floor. To the casual worshiper, it is a church. To a symbologist, it is a library of symbols carved in stone. Robert runs his hand over a column etched with spirals and crosses. Here, geometry becomes prayer. Ratios become hymns. He explains in hushed tones how these structures were more than places of worship. They were vessels of coded knowledge, messages from architects who knew that power and truth could be hidden in plain sight. Sophie listens, but her eyes are elsewhere. She is remembering the times her grandfather brought her here, pointing out details she thought were mere decoration, "Look closer," he would always say. Now she does, and suddenly on the base of a column she notices a mark. It is faint, almost erased by time, but unmistakable. A fleur-de-lis etched within a circle, the sign of the Priory of Sion. Her pulse quickens. Her grandfather had once called it the signature of guardians. Robert bends low, studying the symbol. It is a reminder that Saunière was not alone. For centuries others stood watch over the Grail. The cryptex in Sophie's hands is more than an inheritance. It is a torch passed along a secret line of keepers, but the moment of revelation is shattered. Outside, footsteps echo too loudly, too deliberate to be casual visitors. Sophie stiffens, clutching the cryptex to her chest. Robert motions her into the shadows between pews. Through the cathedral doors strides Silas, his tall frame outlined against the pale light. His head bowed as though in prayer, though his eyes scan the gloom with lethal intent. He is both pilgrim and predator, his presence warping the sanctity of the place. The fugitives hold their breath as he moves down the aisle. Every creak of wood, every sigh of stone feels like it will betray them. Sophie presses the cryptex into Robert's hands, a silent plea that he must protect it even if she cannot. The monk kneels suddenly, whispering prayers in Latin, his voice echoing eerily through the cathedral. Then with terrifying swiftness he rises again, turning his gaze toward the altar as if he can sense their heartbeat behind the walls. Robert tugs Sophie toward a side passage, their footsteps muffled against the cold stone. They slip into the crypt below the church, the air damp and heavy, the walls lined with sarcophagi. Here, among the dead, they move like phantoms themselves. Above them, Silas's steps grow sharper, angrier. He knows they are near. When at last they emerge into daylight through a forgotten side door, Sophie gasps with relief. The car is waiting where they left it, but the moment feels borrowed, fragile. They are no longer simply pursued by law. They are hunted by faith itself, faith corrupted into a weapon. Robert starts the engine, the cathedral receding in the rearview mirror. Its towers silhouetted like watchmen who can no longer protect them. Sophie's voice is barely more than a whisper. "If he finds us, he'll kill us." Robert grips the wheel tighter. "Then we have to stay ahead of him. Your grandfather gave us this cryptex for a reason. We can't fail him." The road unspools before them, leading deeper into history, deeper into danger. Somewhere ahead waits the eccentric scholar who might help them, but for now, the Grail's secret burns silently in the cylinder they carry, a secret worth killing and dying for. Iron gates rise out of the mist like the teeth of a sleeping beast, and beyond them a manor unfurls across clipped lawns and a ribbon of gravel. Broad windows, stone balustrades, a roofline as fussy as a crown. The car crunches forward, tires ticking bits of pebble into the hedges. Sophie keeps the cryptex in her lap, its weight a steady drum against her nerves. Robert studies the facade with the scholar's reflex of reading buildings as books. Everything about this place announces a collector's hunger. The door opens before they can knock. A dignified man in a dark suit, eyes bright, steps quiet, takes them in at a glance. "Sir Lee has been expecting no one," he says in a lilting accent that has learned to be kind by long practice. "And yet he is always expecting questions. This way, if you please." The servant moves like a shadow through a hall hung with tapestries and the polished bones of old armor. He is introduced in passing as Remy, and he ushers them toward a salon where morning light pools across leather and oak. A figure rises from a wing-back chair, leaning on a cane that is more flourish than crutch. His hair is a gray halo, his smile a fox's. "Robert Langdon," he announces, voice warm with theatrical delight. "You do choose the most invigorating hours to turn up unannounced." His gaze lands on Sophie, stays there a heartbeat longer than etiquette, as if he recognizes something behind her eyes. "And you, mademoiselle, bring a storm with you." Sophie offers the simplest truth. We bring a question. Teabing's laughter has a low bell to it. Ah, my favorite contraband. He gestures them to sit, and Remy glides in with a silver tray, tea steaming, cups thin as eggshells. Only when the door clicks shut does Sophie draw the cylinder from her jacket and place it on the table. The air changes. Teabing's eyes sharpen, his breath catches like a boy's. "Good Lord," he whispers. Da Vinci's little dragon. He does not touch it at first, as if afraid the spell will break. Then his fingers hover, admiring the interlocking discs. "You know what you carry?" Robert nods. "A cryptex. A vow turned into an object," Teabing says, almost reverent. "Inside a scroll. Between the scroll and the world, a vial of vinegar. Open it properly with the keyword, and the message lives. Force it open in impatience or fear, and acid eats history. A perfect invention for dangerous truth." His eyes flick between their faces. "And the truth. What story placed this little grenade in your hands?" Sophie tells it cleanly. The Louvre, her grandfather's body turned into a compass of symbols. The chase through ruse and reliquaries. The pale hunter whose prayers sound like shackles. She does not describe the night that drove her from Jacques Saunière years ago. That memory waits like a closed door. But she speaks the names her grandfather left in blood, and watches as Teabing's mind catches fire. "Da Vinci is cipher-smith," he murmurs. "He always was. The church would have preferred him a mere painter. The centuries prefer simple men. But Leonardo was a hive." He pivots, cane thumping once on the parquet, and beckons them into his library. If the salon was wealth, this room is worship. Shelves upon shelves of heresies and histories, facsimiles of forbidden gospels, architectural studies whose margins bristle with Teabing's pencil scars. At a long table he fans out reproductions of Da Vinci's works, pages large enough to court the eye like windows. He places one at the center. A crowded table, 13 men, bread and wine, a moment before betrayal. "Consider," he says, tapping lightly. "Where is the cup? Where is the grail?" Painters of far lesser skill littered their last suppers with goblets and chalices shining like sermons. Leonardo, no. He does something ruder and truer. Robert knows this cadence. He has lectured these questions in neutral tones for years. But Teabing's voice has voltage. "Look at the figure to Jesus' right. Not a bearded fisherman. A delicate jaw, folded hands, hair that falls like a river. The space between them, this V, this chalice born of absence. What if the cup is not an object to be hoarded, but a body to be protected?" Sophie feels the floor tilt, not from dizziness, but from the pressure of a paradigm shifting underfoot. "You're saying the Grail is a person?" "A story about a person," Teabing answers, eyes bright. "A bloodline, not a stone but a seed." He lets the sacrilege hang, then softens it with a shrug. "A theory, Mademoiselle Neveu, one of many, that the Magdalene was not a penitent prostitute the church made of her, but the beloved companion, the carrier of a lineage that threatened power enough to be buried beneath doctrine. The priory, your grandfather's priory, kept that ember breathing in secret. Painters fed it with symbols, architects hid it in churches, and the Templars bled for it. He moves them through images like a conductor. The feminine geometry of triangles, the M that murmurs Magdalene between figures, the floral scatter of lilies and roses, a code for purity and secrecy. In the Madonna of the Rocks, he traces the eerie cave behind the holy group, a womb of stone. In the Mona Lisa, he speaks of duality, of androgyny and union, of names folded within names. Leonardo never wrote on banners, he says. He whispered in structures. Only those fluent in his grammar hear him. Robert listens, resisting reflex and surrendering to curiosity. As a symbologist, he has learned to hold theories as you hold a spark over dry straw, carefully willing to see if it catches. Teabing is brilliant, but brilliance can become a forge for fantasies. Yet the coherence of his map is undeniable. Pattern flows like water between these works. Even if history is not exactly as Teabing paints it, the conversation itself has gravity. Sophie wants to hate it. She wants a secret to be a number, a lock she can pick and be done. But the story Teabing lays out touches the ache she will not name. Her estrangement, her lost grandfather, the night she decided symbols could wound. If Jacques Saunière kept this knowledge, what else did he keep that she cannot forgive? She does not realize her hands have gone white around the cryptex until Robert gently eases it from her grip. Suppose, Robert says, we accept the premise long enough to use it. What would Jacques have expected us to see? What word would he trust us to find? Teabing's smile goes sly. Ah, we return to the lock. He studies the rings, reading their alphabet as if tasting it. He would choose something that is both clue and creed. He was a pedagogue, yes? A lover of etymology? He glances at Sophie, who nods despite herself. Then the answer will have layers, like a name that is also a concept that is also a door. He does not try to turn the discs. He simply stands with the patient hunger of a man who enjoys the hunt more than the kill. Across the channel, clouds are building like a bruise. In a different city, a police captain stares at a blinking dot that has betrayed him. Rage iced over into resolve. Closer in Paris, a monk kneels, receiving a whispered command that makes his scars tremble with purpose. The teacher's voice is soft, almost paternal. An address in the countryside given as if it were a blessing. The monk rises. A car door slams. Tires tear a signature into the road. In the library, time narrows. Teabing brings out a glass case of facsimiles, translations of gospels that did not survive the scissors of emperors, diagrams of rituals too delicate to survive public air. He speaks of councils where politics dressed as piety, of centuries when stories were chosen like kings, of how a single narrative can eclipse a sky full of stars. If the secret inside your cylinder breathes, he says, it will not be a trinket. It will be tinder. Sophie's jaw sets. Then we must decide who gets the fire. Remy appears at the threshold, quiet as dust. Sir, he says, there is a vehicle approaching the gate. 2, perhaps 3. Silence falls with the weight of a dropped curtain. Teabing's cane taps once decisively. My friends, he says, voice suddenly all steel beneath the velvet, we continue the lesson elsewhere. He turns to Remy. Prepare the rolls. We will require discretion and quickly. To Robert and Sophie. You sought me for knowledge. I will give you that and passage. But understand, once we move, the board changes. Pursuers are slow thinkers until you surprise them. Then they become artists. Sophie lifts the cryptex again, and this time it feels not like a burden, but like a promise she is choosing to honor. Robert's pulse steadies into something that feels almost like resolve. They have been running since the Louvre. This will be the first time they choose the direction. Outside, engines idle at the gate, the iron teeth parting. The hedges hold their breath. In the thin light, the manor's windows look like 100 eyes, and somewhere beyond the trees, a man with a white face and a red soul whispers a prayer that is also a knife. The Rolls-Royce glides through the English countryside like a ghost on wheels, its polished body swallowing the soft gray light of dusk. Inside, Robert sits opposite Sophie, the cryptex between them on the leather seat, while Sir Lee Teabing, energized like a conductor before an orchestra, leans forward with his cane tapping against the carpet. You realize, he says with relish, what you hold in your lap is not merely a key to history. It is a weapon forged of truth. His words hang heavy, vibrating in the air. Sophie shifts, clutching the cryptex, the weight of her grandfather's legacy pressing into her hands. Robert studies her expression, the way her jaw tightens, the way her eyes flicker with both determination and unease. He understands. For Sophie, this isn't theory, it's personal. Jacques Saunier's blood bought her this inheritance, and his riddles are now the only bridge left between them. But across Europe, another man kneels in fervent prayer. Silas, the albino monk, bows before a crucifix in a dim stone chamber. His lips murmur psalms while his mind clings to the words of the teacher. The Grail is within reach, the keystone within the grasp of sinners who must be purified. Each lash of his penance is a flame, burning away weakness, leaving only obedience. When he rises, his face is serene, but his eyes blaze with a fanatic fire. He loads his weapon with deliberate calm, then sets out once more, following instructions whispered into his ear like commandments from heaven. Back in the car, Teabing launches into explanation as though delivering a sermon to an eager class. He speaks of the Council of Nicaea, when emperors reshaped divinity into politics, when stories of Mary Magdalene were silenced, when the image of a masculine Christ was crowned with dogma and dissent was branded heresy. His voice quivers with conviction. The church built a fortress of lies, and for centuries men like your grandfather, guardians of the priory, preserved fragments of the original truth. That Christ's legacy was not celibacy and denial, but bloodline and union. Robert listens carefully, his academic skepticism sharpening each word, yet he cannot deny the coherence of Teabing's tapestry. Every piece fits too elegantly to dismiss. Da Vinci's deliberate omissions, the secretive symbols scattered across art and architecture, the coded hints in ancient gospels long buried. He feels the tremor of possibility rising within him, the sense that history is less a straight line than a labyrinth, full of doors hidden in shadow. Sophie, though, is less enraptured. She remembers her grandfather's riddles, his gentle insistence that truth is not something one simply inherits, but something one chooses to seek. Teabing's certainty both fascinates and frightens her. If he is right, then the Grail is not merely a relic, but a revelation that could shatter the foundation of faith itself. And yet part of her wonders if the very power of the story lies not in its proof, but in its mystery. The car slows as they near London. Evening traffic snarls, headlights streaking through the fog like restless stars. Teabing insists they continue to his private residence, where resources and sanctuary await. But Sophie cannot shake the sense that danger is already closing in. Her intuition proves correct. Not far behind them, a nondescript vehicle follows at a careful distance. Inside, Silas grips the wheel, his pale knuckles taut, his gaze unblinking. The teacher's words echo like scripture. Do not fail. Bring me the keystone. For him, there is no choice, no hesitation. The cryptex belongs to God, and he is God's chosen instrument. Every mile narrows the gap between hunter and prey. At Teabing's estate, Remy opens the doors, ushering them quickly inside. The manor hums with quiet wealth, paintings, manuscripts, relics gathered from across the world. Teabing leads them into a study where maps of Europe cover the walls, strings connecting cities like constellations of conspiracy. On the table, magnifying glasses and parchment sprawl like a battlefield. Here, Teabing declares, we have the tools to unlock what Saunier died to protect. Robert places the cryptex on the table. The cylindrical device glimmers under the light, its symbols a silent challenge. Teabing bends low, his eyes gleaming, while Sophie stands back, arms crossed, mistrust etched on her face. We must be cautious, she warns. If we open it wrong, everything inside is destroyed. Teabing chuckles. Ah, the beauty of Leonardo's genius. Knowledge is safe from fools. Only those with patience and insight can inherit it. He glances at Sophie. Which means, my dear, your grandfather trusted you more than any priest, any scholar, perhaps even more than Robert here. The words strike her like an arrow. Her grandfather's faith, his riddles, his final gesture at the Louvre. Everything was designed to lead her to this moment. The thought steadies her trembling hands. She steps forward, her eyes meeting Robert's, silent agreement passing between them. They will solve this together. But outside, unseen in the night, Silas has already breached the estate grounds. His tall frame moves like a shadow across the lawn, his heart pounding with prayer and purpose. He carries with him not just violence, but conviction, the certainty that every act he commits is sanctified by God. In his mind, he is not breaking into a house, he is storming the gates of heresy itself. Inside, oblivious to the danger creeping closer, Robert, Sophie, and Teabing bend over the cryptex, the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. The riddle is before them, the answers hidden in letters and symbols, in the marriage of logic and faith. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the window, death approaches on silent feet, ready to test whether truth is worth more than blood, worth more than blood, worth more than blood. Worth more than blood, worth more than blood, worth more. The first warning is not a sound, but a shiver in the glass. A window pane in Teabing's study trembles as if a giant has exhaled against it. Then the latch turns with surgical quiet and night air pours in, cool and metallic. Robert's hand moves before his mind catches up. He palms the cryptex, tucks it against his chest. Sophie steps back into the wedge of lamplight, eyes cutting to Teabing. The old knight lifts his cane as though it were a rapier and says without turning his head, "Remy." From the hall, the butler appears like punctuation. He does not ask questions, he simply nods once, slides to the wall and vanishes toward the terrace doors. A heartbeat later, a tall, pale shape unfolds from the sill and lands on the carpet with the grace of a hunter. Silas. His lips move in a prayer that is also a threat. His eyes are winter. For a breath, everyone is still. The scene arranged like a painting. The intruder backlit by wet moonlight. The scholar, the professor, the cryptographer frozen mid-thought. The cryptex, a small planet with conflicting gravities tugging at it. Silas moves first. He lunges not at Robert, not at Teabing, but at Sophie, as if the key to everything must be removed at its heart. She twists away faster than his expectation, and his shoulder catches the edge of the desk with a thud that knocks books to the floor. Robert throws his weight into the monk's back and is tossed off like a coat. The cane cracks once across Silas's forearm, a blow Teabing delivers with surprising, almost gleeful precision. Silas absorbs it with a hiss and reaches again. This time, Remy arrives behind him with a length of cord, looping it with the efficiency of a sailor. The room erupts into motion. Furniture jars, glass skitters, breath grinds into the sound of struggle. It is not brave heroics that save them, but physics and timing. Silas slips on a scattering of slick, fallen pages and drops to one knee. Robert and Remy pounce together, leverage pinning the monk's arms. Teabing's cane presses into the sharp notch of Silas's collarbone until the man's strength goes taut, then slack. In a minute that feels like a mile. Wrists cinch, ankles bind, a gag bites. The room slams back into silence, ravaged and humming. Up close, the monk's face is younger than his violence. The scars on his body make a map of a different kind of devotion. Sophie stands above him, breath shallow, and feels an ache where pity and fury collide. He would have killed her. He believed that would be holy. There is a grief in that thought that surprises her. Robert watches the rise and fall of Silas's chest and wonders how many stories of God it takes to weaponize a soul. Teabing is the first to speak. "We must go at once." He walks to the window and peers through the slit of curtain. If he came, others are not far. And if the police arrive instead, they will deliver us to different executioners. He turns back, eyes hot. "I propose a change of theater." "Where?" Robert asks, still tasting adrenaline. London, Teabing replies as if it were obvious. Where the next answers have waited all along. He taps the cryptex with a fingertip, not touching, almost blessing. Your Jacques Saunière never left breadcrumbs without a destination. And our destination smells of old stone and law. Sophie's gaze flickers to the cylinder's rings, then to the scattered reproductions of Da Vinci spread across the table. She does not want to run again without understanding something. Before we move, she says, we need a step forward. She points at the letters cut into the cryptex's discs. He wouldn't have sent us from refuge to refuge blind. He trained me for this. Robert nods. He lifts the photographs she carries like relics. Saunière's dying anagrams, the sequence of numbers that had righted themselves into a spiral, the names that became paintings that became a grammar. What word does a man choose when he is dying? He asks softly. If he wants not only to guard a truth but to speak to his granddaughter. Teabing's eyes narrow with pleasure at the puzzle. The ancients named the quality seekers need most, he murmurs. Not power, not faith, something colder, cleaner. Sophie hears her grandfather's voice cross a decade. Wisdom, ma chérie, is the only lamp that doesn't go out. A chill, then a certainty. Sophia, she whispers, and it is not only a word. It is her name refracted through centuries, Greek turned French turned flesh. Her hands are steady now. She turns the discs, letters clicking with insect delicacy. S-O-F-I-A. A seam sighs. The end cap loosens half a breath, and the room holds itself as still as a chapel. She draws it open with the care of a surgeon. Inside the cylinder, wrapped around a fragile vial, lies a narrow scroll. Robert's throat tightens. If they've guessed wrong, the vinegar would already be feeding on paper. But the parchment slides free, dry and whole. Teabing laughs under his breath, delighted as a boy finding contraband in a grandfather clock. Leonardo, you magnificent spider. The scroll unrolls to a few cryptic lines, ink like a whisper from another century. The riddle does what good riddles do. It points while it misdirects. In London lies a knight, a pope interred. Robert reads, his tomb a map to where the key is stored. Beneath, a second couplet winds the thread tighter, hinting at starry wisdom and apples fall, a celestial mind whose laws taught heaven to obey mathematics. Knights, Teabing says, savoring the word. Templars, a temple. His cane ticks once. Temple Church, or Westminster Abbey, Robert counters, electricity waking his voice. A knight, a pope interred. Alexander Pope wrote the epitaph for Newton. Starry wisdom, apples fall. It's Newton's tomb. Sophie reads the lines again and feels a clench of both dread and joy. This is how her grandfather loved her. By building roads of thought she would have to walk. The ambiguity is not a flaw, it is a test. Then London is not just the right city, she says. It's the only city. Precisely, Teabing answers. And we will let our enemies choose the wrong door while we slip through the right. He raps the floor. Remy, wheels. The butler returns with a cool nod, as if kidnapping monks and decoding heresies are features of his job description. He collects a set of keys. Teabing snaps orders with airy calm. The armored rolls, the private strip, the jet made ready. Robert and Sophie secure the scroll back inside the cryptex and reseal it. The device feels heavier now, as if knowledge has mass. On the carpet, Silas stirs and manages a muffled sound. Sophie kneels, eyes level with his. Who is the teacher? She asks, each word precise. The monk's gaze burns above the gag. He does not answer. Perhaps he cannot. Perhaps he will not. But something in his eyes flickers when she says the name, as if a door opened on a wind he recognizes. They do not call the police. They cannot. Teabing's security staff binds Silas more securely and locks him in a storage room that smells of cedar and wax. It does not feel noble. It feels necessary. Robert stares at the door after it clicks shut and feels the scrape of weariness in his bones. The line between right and wrong has blurred into a fog where only urgency is visible. The manor becomes a hive. Lights snap off. Others bloom along a hidden path. A garage yawns open on a vehicle that looks more fortress than car. They move like an organism. Teabing's cane ticking command, Remy ghosting ahead, Robert and Sophie flanking the cryptex as if they are escorting a monarch. Night presses close. The hedges murmur. The gate teeth part. On the road to the airfield, the world narrows to the tunnel of headlights and a ribbon of black. Teabing, giddy and grave at once, outlines the plan. Fly under a cloud of paperwork that makes them legally uninteresting. Land within reach of both temple and abbey, let the riddle's fork draw their pursuers one way while they take the other. If we are very lucky, he adds, our enemies will be devout in their assumptions. Robert watches Sophie in the strobing dash light. She has become all edges and focus, grief molten into purpose. He wants to say something soft and human, about her grandfather, about the cruel kindness of riddles. But the moment doesn't belong to softness. It belongs to forward motion. Behind them at the manor, a locked door will not stay locked forever. A phone will ring in a distant bishop's pocket. A voice like velvet will purr instructions. Loyalties will creak on their hinges. But for now, the jet waits under sodium lamps like a sleeping albatross. They reach the runway as a wind combs the grass flat. Metal groans, stairs lower. As they climb into the cabin's hush, the cryptex rests across Sophie's forearms like a relic returned to pilgrimage. London pulls at them from across the dark, a city of carved stone and codified law where a knight lies under a poet's words and the apple's path is still falling. Engines spool. The ground shivers. The plane lifts, and with it the fragile thread of a secret that has survived inquisitions, bonfires, and the long patience of those who kept watch. Above the clouds, the world simplifies only black and the needle of their course. Below, the hunters move their pieces. Ahead, a tomb waits that is not a tomb, and a revelation waits that will not behave. London greets them not with grandeur, but with rain. The jet sinks through gray curtains, its lights slicing mist until the runway flares beneath them. Tires shriek, engines reverse, and suddenly the storm is above instead of around. As the Rolls-Royce glides from the hangar onto slick roads, the city unfurls like a stone labyrinth soaked in history. Spires pierce the clouds, bridges clutch the Thames, statues brood from their pedestals. This is no ordinary backdrop. It is a theater where centuries of secrets have been staged. Teabing sits forward, electric with anticipation. Ah, London. The Priory loved this city. The Templars bled for it. Kings plotted over it. Poets buried truth under rhyme. If Saunière left you here, mademoiselle, it was no accident. His eyes gleam at Sophie, who clutches the cryptex against her chest. Robert watches her quietly. He can sense the storm inside her, grief braided with determination. She carries not only a riddle but the shadow of a grandfather who both raised and estranged her. Their destination, Temple Church, a circular sanctuary once built by the Knights Templar. Its walls echo with sword oaths and whispers of forbidden faith. When they arrive, the rain has softened into drizzle, cobblestones slick with reflected light. The church looms ahead, round and ancient, its very geometry a sermon in stone. Inside, silence reigns. The nave is dotted with stone effigies, knights carved in repose, swords folded across their chests, eyes closed as if waiting for a command that never came. Sophie moves among them slowly, her footsteps soft. She recalls the verse etched into her mind. In London lies a knight, a pope interred. Her gaze drifts across the effigies. Each night seems identical, yet her grandfather had trained her to notice the smallest deviation. She kneels beside one figure, tracing faint symbols on the stone's edge. "This one," she whispers. He carries a mark of the rose. Robert crouches beside her, heart quickening. The rose, a symbol of secrecy, of silence, of the Grail. Yet the riddle is slippery. "A knight, a pope interred," he mutters, "but no pope is buried here." His mind races through history. Perhaps it is metaphor. Perhaps Pope refers not to the office, but to the poet, Alexander Pope, who had written epitaphs for men of science. The thought strikes him like lightning. Isaac Newton. The apples fall. The starry heavens above. Could the riddle point beyond this church, to Westminster Abbey, where Newton lies entombed? As he speaks the name, Sophie's eyes widen. "My grandfather adored Newton. He once told me that science and faith were not enemies, but dance partners." She clutches the cryptex tighter. Perhaps the riddle's fork was deliberate. Two possible paths, a test of discernment. Teabing, however, is less contemplative. He hobbles with his cane among the effigies, his voice rising with excitement. "The temple is the heart. Do you not see? These knights were guardians. The priory would not point you here for nothing. Somewhere beneath these stones another clue waits." His eyes glitter, half scholarly fervor, half obsession. But their search is not private for long. From the shadows at the far end of the nave, the heavy creak of wood betrays another presence. Figures move, law enforcement, weapons drawn, their voices echoing sharply against the sacred walls. Bezu Fach has not abandoned the chase. His men fan out, their flashlights slicing across the tombs, beams converging on Robert, Sophie, and Teabing. "It Robert Langdon," the captain's voice booms, thick with accusation. "You will surrender the keystone." The air splinters with tension. Sophie grips Robert's arm, fear and fire mingling in her gaze. Robert feels the cryptex pressing into his side, a fragile bomb of history that could dissolve in vinegar and vanish forever. Teabing's face hardens. The sparkle of eccentricity in his eyes sharpens into steel. "Gentlemen," he says coolly, "you storm a church with guns while chasing myths you cannot comprehend. This is not law, it is desecration." The standoff stretches thin. Outside, thunder murmurs. Inside, stone knights stare blindly at the living. Robert's mind races. They are cornered again, trapped between the weight of centuries and the force of the present. And in the dark recesses of the nave, unseen by the police, another figure lurks. Silas, pale and patient, waiting for chaos to open a path for violence. For now, everything hangs by a thread. A riddle with two answers. Allies who may not be allies. Hunters tightening their grip. And a secret wrapped in stone and blood. One wrong word, one wrong move, and the truth of the Grail could vanish as completely as breath in a storm. The nave holds its breath. Gun barrels glitter in the dim, voices ricochet off stone. Orders to freeze, to lie down, to surrender what none of them can even name without changing it. Robert raises his hands slowly, feeling the cryptex's stubborn weight against his ribs. Sophie's fingers lace with his for a second, an anchor more than a plea, then release. Teabing stands as if addressing Parliament, cane angled like a saber, fury and delight flaring behind his civilized smile. "I, Captain Fash," he says, voice clipped and ringing. "Do you truly intend to execute a raid on a Templar church? You chase what you do not understand. The keystone is not a weapon for your evidence locker. It's a library you can destroy by sneezing too hard." "On your knees," Fash barks back, but his eyes flick just once toward the ancient effigies sprawled at their feet. The sleeping knights who have seen worse storms than this. The moment of doubt is small, human. It's enough for chaos to smell its chance. A shadow peels from a column. Silas. He moves with prayerful economy, and then the prayer is teeth. He launches. Sophie twists away. Robert pivots, catching the monk's arm. The cryptex slips and hits the stone with a sickening clack that freezes everyone, even the armed men. One more impact and centuries vanish in vinegar. Silence falls like a blade. "Careful," Teabing murmurs, as if to a room of fidgeting students. "You are carrying an extinction." From the side aisle comes the softest sound, a door unlatching. Remy steps into view, immaculate even in urgency, gloved hand curled around a compact pistol that no butler is supposed to own. He moves behind Captain Fash with the ease of choreography, and in a blink, the muzzle kisses the base of the Frenchman's skull. "Weapons down," Remy says, his accent suddenly harder. The deference burned off. "We will not ask twice." Betrayal redraws the room. Teabing's head tilts, surprised but not as surprised as he should be. Robert reads that tilt and feels the slow cold of understanding unfurl in his gut. Silas's chest heaves. Behind the gag scars of penance, he looks almost relieved to see a familiar ally. Sophie, eyes steady, steps over the fallen cryptex and picks it up with both hands. She cradles it as if it were bone. "You freed him," she says to Remy without looking away from the monk. It isn't a question. In her memory, the storage room door at the manor clicks open again. A rope loosens. A debt is paid. Remy's smile is small and vicious. "By order of one who knows the path," he says, not naming the teacher, but making the name present like a draft of cold air. "Hand us the keystone and we leave you your lives." Or, Sophie replies, her voice flat, "I drop this on the stone and no one has anything." She turns her wrists just enough to let gravity tug. The room inhales. Teabing raises his cane in a placating gesture. "We are all men and women of some education. Let us avoid barbarism." His gaze slides to Robert. Something passes there. Complicity, calculation, a signal tossed like a coin. "Remy," he says more gently, "this helps no one if it ends in fragments." "Then give it to me, sir," Remy counters. The honorific lands like mockery. Silas's eyes never leave the cylinder in Sophie's hands. He is almost whispering through the gag, prayers perhaps, or a litany that holds him upright. Robert can feel the choices crane apart, yield and lose the only leverage they have, defy and risk annihilating the secret Saunière died for. What breaks the stalemate is not courage but physics again. Rain gathering outside finally lets go its weight. It slams the stone roof in a sudden roar. A fuse of thunder rattles the circular walls. Heads turn instinctively, flashlights stutter. Robert moves. He hits Silas low, not to injure but to direct. Momentum throws the monk sideways into Remy, who stumbles but does not fall. The gun swings. Fash drops and rolls like a man who is trained to survive rooms like this. A shot cracks. Spiders a stained glass pane with a white star. "Go!" Teabing shouts, not at the police, not at Remy, but at Robert and Sophie. "For God's sake, take it and go!" His cane slams down, startling even himself with its force. They run. Between effigies, past blind stone eyes, through a side door that offers night and rain and the wild mercy of a city's maze. Behind them, shouts braid with the storm. Another shot goes off and dies in the vaulting. The church swallows its own chaos. They spill into a narrow court where slick flagstones mirror the sky. Sophie's breath scalds the cold air. Robert's shoulder throbs where Silas's bone found him. They dive beneath an archway and press their backs to damp brick. He looks at her. She looks at him. The cryptex sits between them like a third heartbeat. "Remy," Robert says, naming the fissure in their trust aloud. "And Teabing knew," Sophie answers, a blade in her whisper. "Maybe not everything, but enough to stay calm when a gun was at our heads." Her mind snapshots the tiniest details. The way Teabing had not seemed surprised to see Silas, the way Remy's gun hand had never wavered near his employer. The picture that forms is ugly. In the nave they've left behind, Fash is back on his feet, barking orders with the hoarse fury of a man who almost lost his men. He has no patience for myth in this moment, only for procedure. Yet as he points and shouts, a senior officer murmurs in his ear. A tidbit arrives from Paris. A tracker's data proves absurd. A bishop's name enters the conversation like rot entering a beam. Doubt, long a hairline crack in Fasha's conviction, opens. Maybe he's been used. Maybe the trail was salted with another man's certainty. He thinks of Langdon not murdering when he could have, of the woman's eyes, level and unbroken, of the way they refused to smash the thing in her hands. Hard men pray for clarity. Sometimes it arrives as a headache. Outside, Robert and Sophie run again. London's veins, alleyways, mews, passages named for trades long dead, carry them toward a greater artery. Westminster, Sir Isaac Newton's stone bed beneath a vault jeweled with history. The riddle's fork points there with both teeth. Even if Temple Church held one answer, it now holds too many guns. The Abbey at least holds the promise of a crowd. They move by instinct and memory. Robert maps the city in his mind, from the Temple precinct through Fleet Street across to the Strand past the river's black sheen. Rain blurs neon into watercolor. Sirens Doppler and vanish. Twice they think they're followed. Twice it is only the ghost of panic. When they pause beneath a dark awning to catch breath, Sophie speaks into the thrum of rain. If Teabing is part of this, if we treat every kindness like a question, Robert finishes. He wants to argue, to defend the mentor who opened his library and his mind. But the image of the cane tapping in command while Remy leveled a gun will not dislodge. Trust shrinks to the size of what they can carry between two hands. He takes the cryptex, tests its seams. It is still sealed, the scroll inside safe, for now. The letters on the discs gleam like wet teeth. We have a riddle, he thinks, and an ever-shortening fuse. He remembers Newton's epitaph written by Pope. Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. Starry wisdom. The apples fall. If Saunière wanted them to stand anywhere, it is under the poet's words in the mathematician's tomb. They move again. The glow of Parliament licks the clouds. The Abbey swells out of darkness, a ship of stone at anchor. Gargoyles drip rain from their jaws. The great door broods. Robert feels a shudder of awe despite fatigue. Cathedrals, he has learned, are machines for compressing time. Walk in and you suddenly share a room with 1,000 years. They are nearly to the side gate when a black car ghosts against the curb and stops with a hush that smells of leather and money. Teabing's rolls. The rear door opens. Teabing sits inside, framed by dim light, alone. Remy and Silas are nowhere visible. His expression is composed, almost grandfatherly. "Please," he says softly, "get in. The police are behind you by minutes. The Abbey is crawling with them already. I can get you inside without raising a single eyebrow. We are not enemies, Sophie." He uses her name like a gentling hand. "Whatever Remy has done, I did not sanction." Raindrops drum the roof, tinny and relentless. Robert and Sophie stand at the open door, eyes searching his face for the hairline crack that will tell them which story to believe. Teabing's cane lies on the seat beside him like a sleeping snake. If he is lying, stepping in is stepping into a box that locks from the outside. If he is telling the truth, refusing him throws away the one advantage he might still provide: access. Sophie looks at the Abbey, then back at the car. She thinks of her grandfather teaching her that sometimes the only way forward is through a door you don't trust with a man you doubt. So long as you keep your hand on the latch. She nods once. "We ride with you," she says, but the cryptex does not leave my hands. A smile ghosts Teabing's mouth. Agreed. They slide into the fragrant dark. The door seals, muting the rain to a soft, steady hiss. As the rolls pulls away, London glides past like a wet page turning. In Robert's chest, certainty and suspicion balance on a blade. Beside him, Sophie holds the cylinder of secrets as if it were both her inheritance and her weapon. Ahead, under a poet's words about light, a mathematician's bones wait. Behind, somewhere in the weft of streets, a butler with a gun and a penitent with a mission weave the teacher's will. The city tightens its circle. Betrayal has entered the room and taken a chair. The only solace is motion. The only prayer that the next door opens onto answers before the last one slams shut. London rolls by in sheets of rain, street lamps bending their light across the wet glass of the rolls. Inside, the cabin is too quiet. The leather smells rich, the air thick with unsaid words. Teabing sits opposite Robert and Sophie, cane angled neatly across his knees. His smile carved with just enough warmth to invite trust and just enough shadow to sow doubt. "Westminster," he says finally, as if naming a rendezvous rather than a tomb. Sauniere's verse leaves no room for error. The knight, the pope, the apple, it all converges there. Newton's grave is the axis. Robert studies him. The words ring true, yet Teabing's voice carries a strange satisfaction, as though every danger only confirms the inevitability of his own plan. Sophie feels it too. She cradles the cryptex in her lap, her arms folded over it, her eyes refusing to leave Teabing's. "If this is the path, then why did Remy betray us at Temple Church?" she asks. Teabing's smile falters a fraction. "Remy is loyal only to the highest bidder," he says smoothly. "I offered him loyalty. Perhaps another offered him more. Do not confuse the servant's greed with the master's intentions." But Sophie hears something in his tone, a tiny fracture like porcelain under strain. Her grandfather had taught her to listen not just to what people said, but to the music beneath their words. And the music here sounds practiced, not pure. The car weaves through narrow streets until the Abbey rises ahead, its Gothic towers clawing into storm clouds, its facade streaked with rain. Floodlights cast pale fire against stone saints, their faces half in shadow. For centuries, kings, queens, and poets have slept beneath these vaults. Tonight, two fugitives and an eccentric knight step among them to unravel a secret that has burned for 2 millennia. Inside, the Abbey hums with a silence so deep it is nearly sound. Candles flicker before side altars, their flames trembling in draughts that smell of damp stone. Robert's eyes are drawn immediately to the north transept, where the great scientists rest. Marble slabs stretch across the floor, carved with epitaphs. His breath catches when he sees it, a white tomb undercut with words by Alexander Pope. Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. Sophie kneels beside the slab, her fingers brushing the letters. The verse from the cryptex thrums in her ears. A knight, a pope interred, his tomb a map. She looks around. The Abbey is filled with monuments, each one layered with symbolism. Stars carved in stone, celestial diagrams, roses woven into iron grills. But her gaze fixes on Newton's effigy. The great scientist reclines in marble, his hand upon a book, celestial orbs carved above his head. It is not merely a tomb, it is a puzzle in stone. Robert joins her, tracing the carvings with a scholar's hunger. Sauniere wanted us to see this. Newton, the union of science and faith. A man who unlocked the heavens and yet here lies in the heart of a church. He looks at Sophie. Your grandfather believed knowledge and belief were not enemies. Perhaps this tomb is not only a clue, it is a reconciliation. Teabing's cane strikes the floor lightly. Beautiful philosophy, Robert, but philosophy does not open cryptexes. We must search. Quickly. His impatience is a knife beneath the velvet of his words. He limps closer, eyes gleaming. There, the roses. At the base of Newton's monument, Sophie sees it. A cluster of stone roses carved with deliberate care. A rose, the symbol of secrecy, the sub rosa. Her grandfather's mark. Her breath sharpens. She presses the petals, fingers searching for hidden seams. And there, faint but undeniable, is a small hollow, a depression just wide enough to fit the cryptex. Before she can act, footsteps echo sharply through the transept. Sophie stiffens. Robert turns. At the far end of the nave, a small group approaches with lethal purpose. Silas among them, face pale as chalk, eyes burning. Remy at his side, pistol ready. And behind them, half in shadow but commanding the moment like a conductor stepping to his podium. An unseen voice that Sophie knows in her bones must be the teacher. The air collapses into silence. Robert and Sophie freeze by Newton's tomb, the cryptex between them. Teabing does not move. For a moment he seems merely another witness to betrayal. But then his cane shifts. His lips curl into something halfway between triumph and confession. His voice drops, soft as rain. "There is no teacher," he says, "only me." The words strike Sophie like a blow. Robert feels his throat dry instantly. Everything, Remy's treachery, Silas's devotion, the web of riddles, threads back to this man before them, smiling with patient madness. Teabing leans heavier on his cane, eyes glittering with fervor. "Do you not see? I have waited my whole life for this night. The Grail will not rot in shadows while cowards guard it like a trinket. It will rise, and the world will kneel to truth. The betrayal is complete. The ally they trusted, the scholar they followed, has become the architect of their peril." In the abbey's silence, amid the tombs of kings and scientists, the true enemy stands revealed. Not a fanatic monk or a greedy servant, but a brilliant mind twisted by obsession. And with Teabing's revelation, the final act of the chase begins. For a long moment, the abbey feels like a stage where every player has finally stepped into their light. Rain needles the stained glass. Thunder vibrates through the ribs of the vault. Teabing stands not as patron, but as judge. His eyes bright with missionary fever. "I have shepherded you to the axis," he says, cane pricking the stone near Newton's slab. "Now give me what your grandfather stole from centuries. Give me the Grail's path." Remy steadies his pistol. Silas stares at the cylinder in Sophie's arms as if it were a relic he's dreamed since childhood, devotion and dread twisting his features. Robert calculates distances, angles, the breath between one word and a trigger. Sophie doesn't yield. She kneels again beside Newton, placing the cryptex on the ledge of stone roses. Her voice is steady, but he can hear grief beneath it like a low river. "My grandfather did not die so you could turn a secret into a sword." Teabing's smile is thin. "He died because small men hid big truths. I am merely opening the shutters." He jerks his chin at Remy. "Take it." "Don't." Robert's word snaps like a wire. He lifts a hand toward the carved planets above Newton's effigy. "Let us do what Saunière asked, one riddle at a time." Teabing hesitates. Ego loves process if process promises victory. He nods once. Quickly then. Robert's mind knots around the couplet on the parchment. Starry wisdom. Apples fall. The poet's epitaph glows beneath his feet. Let Newton be, and all was light. Apple. Gravity dragged from myth to math by a man who refused to stop looking. The password should be simple enough to hide in plain sight. He meets Sophie's eyes, pitches his voice to reach only her. "Trust me." She turns the discs, the tiny clicks loud in the hush. PPLE. The mechanism sighs as if relieved to be remembered. The cap loosens under her fingers. No sudden moves. Remy warns, gun unwavering. Sophie eases the end free. Inside the cylinder, nested like a secret within a secret, lies a second, smaller cryptex. A bone-white infant in the hollow of its mother, lettered with a new alphabet, a new dare. Between its skin and the scroll coiled at its heart, the slender ampule glints. The vinegar that would erase everything if anger gets a handhold. Teabing's breath breaks into a laugh. "Of course." he whispers, delighted. Leonardo, you devious old fox. He extends his palm. Bring it to me, child. Sophie hugs the smaller cryptex to her sternum instead. No. Teabing's warmth evaporates. He draws a compact pistol from the shadow of his coat, black against the alabaster of Newton's stone. His voice goes flat. Mademoiselle Neveu, I have been patient with your filial pieties. Hand me the keystone or I take it after reducing your resolve. Silas flinches at the gun, glances at Remy, then at Teabing, as if realizing for the first time the teacher does not kneel even before God's house. Something like confusion ghosts across his face. The faith that armored him meets a mind that uses faith the way a locksmith uses picks. Robert lifts both hands, palms open. Lee, stop. If you force this, you'll destroy the very thing you spent your life seeking. He reaches slowly toward the open sheath of the larger cylinder as if to reseat the inner cryptex. His fingertips brush cold stone. His other hand, unseen behind the curve of the outer casing, pinches delicately at the glass vial's neck. He has shown this device to students 100 times, lectured on its cruelty and its grace. The vial is meant to break if you pry, not if you slide. He slides, careful, breath held, drawing the ampule free as if he were removing a thorn from a sleeping lion. Hands where I can see them, Remy snaps. Robert lifts the empty outer shell, both hands visible, the tucked ampule ghosting his sleeve like a hidden heartbeat. He looks at Sophie. Her eyes flick to his cuff, then back to Teabing. She understands. The abbey shudders with a new sound, the low thunder of boots entering the nave. Voices bark, radios crackle. Captain Foch's baritone cuts through the echoes, commanding without heat. The circle around Newton fractures. Officers fan across the transept, weapons drawn but lower than before, as if someone has finally explained what a single misstep could destroy. Foch's gaze snaps to Robert, then Sophie, then the pistol in Teabing's hand. Drop the weapon, Sir Lee, he says, breathing hard, anger braided with something like apology. It seems I have been chasing the wrong quarry. Teabing doesn't even glance at him. You arrive late, Captain, and you will leave ignorant. My quarrel is with cowardice, not policemen. He edges closer, gun a lever, pushing the moment toward collapse. Sophie, stop! A new voice cracks, frayed with desperation and loss. A bishop in a rain-dark cassock staggers from the aisle, face bloodless, one arm cradled against his ribs. Aringarosa. His eyes find Silas with the ferocity of a father and the terror of a man who has led a child onto a blade. My son, he pleads, voice breaking. This is not God's work. It was never God's work. I was wrong. Silas reels as if struck. The scaffolding of obedience that held him upright shivers. He looks to Teabing for anchorage and sees only hunger. The crucifix around his neck suddenly weighs like stone. Remy swears under his breath, the gun wavering a hair. Enough sermons, he snarls and pivots, trying to swing the scene back to the old script. He never finishes. Foch's men close like a tide. A single shot cracks. Remy's pistol jerks. A high window spits a new white star. In the recoil, he slips. A constable takes him down, metal clattering across marble. Another officer steps between Silas and everyone else, palms out, voice low, the particular tone men learn for talking the lost off ledges. Silas's breathing rattles. He sinks to his knees as if the air has learned a new gravity. Teabing's eyes flash with fury at the intrusion of repentance. Enough, he hisses, and he takes the step that crosses the last moral line. He lunges, grabbing the smaller cryptex in both hands, wrenching it from Sophie's arms with surprising strength. Lee! Robert's shout ricochets. Teabing raises the cylinder high, triumphant. The end of shadows, he vows, and pivots as if to flee into the dark of the transept where the abbey becomes a maze he knows too well. Robert does the only thing left that does not involve gunfire or prayer. Drop it! He roars, and he hurls the opened outer shell of the larger cryptex to the floor. It explodes into a clatter of stone, an empty menace. Teabing startles, instinct snapping his gaze downward, expecting vinegar and loss. In that sliver of distraction, Sophie moves, quick as she was in the Louvre, quicker now because the stakes have burned away hesitation. She kicks Teabing's cane aside. The old knight loses balance, and for a heartbeat both his hands are about the cylinder instead of the pistol. Foch is there in 2 strides. The gun is stripped. Handcuffs glint. The teacher's mouth fills with eloquence and finds only breath. Silence trembles, then settles. Foch looks at Robert, and the apology becomes words. I should have listened sooner. He nods at the cylinder in Teabing's shackled hands, now surrendered to an evidence bag. Will this detonate if we sneeze? Robert opens his palm. On it lies the thin glass vial he pulled like a thorn. It would have, he says, gentler than he expects. Not anymore. Teabing hears, and the knowledge wounds him more than steel. You meddling schoolmaster, he whispers, fury and admiration braided. You'll give it to the priory, and they'll bury it another 1,000 years. We'll read it, Sophie says. She looks at the smaller cryptex as if it were the last letter of a man she loved and fought. And we'll decide what it asks of us. Aringarosa sways, pain bending him toward the floor. He reaches for Silas's shoulder. Forgive me, he says raw. The monk presses his forehead to the stone and sobs like a child. Terrible, human, free of the armor that made him a weapon. The abbey exhales. Officers holster weapons. The thunder rolls farther away. For the first time in a night and a day, the air tastes like something other than fear. Robert studies the small cylinder. Newton's riddle has served its purpose. The password was the fruit that fell. Inside lies a path still hidden. He knows enough stories to know that roads don't end in libraries. They end in places where the body remembers what the mind discovers. A chapel with carvings like a forest. A border where history shifts accents but not stones. Scotland. The very thought tastes like cold air and old wood. Foch sees the direction of his gaze, and in an act that surprises even himself, he nods. Go, he says, before somebody higher than me decides to have opinions. He flicks a look at Teabing, nostrils flaring with disgust. We'll handle this zealot. Teabing tries one last sermon from his cuffed throne. You think truth is safe in your hands? Your children afraid of daylight. Sophie meets his gaze, and for the first time there is no tremor in hers. Truth doesn't need you to aim it like a gun. Outside, the rain has gentled to a mist that makes the abbey glow. Robert and Sophie step into it with the smaller cryptex wrapped in cloth against her heart. Behind them, history places one more stone. A brilliant man unmasked, not as guardian but as thief of meanings. Ahead, the road angles north toward a chapel that has waited centuries to breathe. They move into the wet London night, lighter by a vial of vinegar and heavier by the responsibility of a secret that refuses to be only a fact. The city's lights blur into constellations on the slick streets. Somewhere on the far side of fog and fields, a hill holds a church like a memory. The story does not loosen, it changes key. And the next door, when it opens, will open on home without knowing it. The journey north feels like leaving one world for another. London fades behind them, a sprawl of lights swallowed by fog, and the countryside unfolds in silence, fields dark and endless under a sky pricked with stars. Sophie leans her forehead to the cold window. Her arms lock tight around the smaller cryptex as if it might dissolve into air if she loosens her grip. Robert watches her, sensing the storm beneath her quiet. She has lost her grandfather to blood and riddles, lost her trust in the man who pretended to guide them, and yet she carries on. Not because she trusts the road ahead, but because she knows there is no other road. Rosslyn? The name stirs in Robert's thoughts like an echo from his studies. Rosslyn Chapel, a medieval masterpiece just south of Edinburgh, its stone walls laced with carvings that whisper in symbols rather than words. The Priory of Sion had always been rumored to circle it in reverence. He can almost feel Saunier's hand guiding them still, pushing them toward a sanctuary that is also a revelation. They arrive near dawn. Mist coils across the hills, silvering the heather. The chapel rises from the earth like a vision, ornate, improbable, every inch of stone a page from some forgotten scripture. Its towers and buttresses bristle with carvings, angels and demons, vines twining into knots, faces half human and half myth. Sophie inhales sharply. She remembers coming here once as a child with her grandfather. At the time, she thought it was only a strange old church. Now she understands. He was preparing her even then. Inside, the chapel hums with silence alive enough to be a voice. Shafts of morning light break through narrow windows, painting the air with dust and gold. Columns twist into vegetal spirals, arches cradle stars and roses. Every surface is a code waiting to be read. Sophie's steps are hesitant at first, then surer, as memory guides her to the Lady Chapel at the east end. She pauses before the apprentice pillar, a column wound with stone vines that seem to climb toward heaven itself. He loved this pillar, she murmurs, said it held all of creation in one trunk. Robert touches the carvings with reverence. He can feel the centuries vibrating under his palm, the patience of hands that chiseled messages for eyes unborn. If the Grail is anywhere, he says softly, it isn't in a vault or a chalice. It's here, in these symbols, in the story woven through this place. Sophie kneels at the base of the pillar. There, set into the floor, is a small cavity sealed with worn stone. Her pulse quickens. She places the cryptex down, aligning its letters with care. Robert crouches beside her, and together they twist the discs. They already know the first password, Apple. But within this second cryptex lies another secret, another lock. Her grandfather's voice comes back to her like a ghost. The greatest secret is not hidden in words, but in blood. She breathes deeply, then speaks the name that has haunted every step of their journey. Magdalene. The discs click into place. The cylinder sighs and the cap loosens. Sophie opens it slowly, carefully, terrified of the fragile vial within. But this time, no trick, no second riddle. The scroll emerges dry and whole. On it, lines of text written in the flowing Latin of old manuscripts. Robert reads aloud, his voice low. Passages from the suppressed Gospels, accounts that tell of Mary Magdalene not as sinner but as companion, bearer of bloodline, mother of legacy. Sophie's breath catches. The Grail is not a cup. It never was. It is lineage, living flesh, the blood of Christ carried forward in the womb of a woman. Saunier's death, the Priory's guardianship, the labyrinth of riddles, all designed to protect this truth from those who would destroy it. Her hands tremble as she lowers the scroll. Does this mean... She cannot finish. Robert looks at her, eyes gentle. It means the Grail is not an object. It's a story, a family, perhaps even you. The thought rattles her bones. She remembers the childhood estrangement, the secrets her grandfather kept locked away. The mystery of her parents' deaths. Could it be that her own blood carried the legacy of a line hidden for centuries? For a moment she feels the floor tilt beneath her, but then, steadied by Robert's gaze, she exhales. Whether it is fact or symbol, inheritance or myth, one thing is certain. Her grandfather believed she was strong enough to bear it. They reseal the cryptex, wrapping the scroll with care. Sophie touches the apprentice pillar one last time. I think, she whispers, this is where he wanted it to stay. Not shouted from rooftops, not weaponized like Teabing wanted, just alive, in stone, in me. Robert nods. Secrets don't always need to be revealed. Sometimes they need only to be remembered. Together they leave the scroll nestled in the cavity beneath the pillar, sealed in the silence of Rosslyn. Outside, the mist is lifting, the hills glowing in the first clean light of day. For Sophie, it feels like rebirth. For Robert, it feels like grace. They walk out into the morning side by side, not fugitives anymore, but keepers of a secret both fragile and eternal. The Grail has not been found, it has been understood. Morning gathers itself around Rosslyn like a breath held, then softened. The mist that hugged the hills loosens into ribbons and lifts off the heather. Rooks carve dark cursive over the chapel roof. Inside, the silence they leave behind is not empty. It is full of old promises. Robert and Sophie step into the yard and feel the difference on their skin. The night's pursuits have fallen away. In their place is the quieter gravity of what they now carry. Not proof to be brandished, but a story to be lived with. Across the lane, a stone cottage wakes. Its door opens with the creak of wood that has known many winters, and an older woman steps out, hair white as chalk, shawl pulled close. She looks at Sophie as one looks at a face glimpsed in a dream and then found in daylight. A younger man appears behind her, features that steal breath from Sophie's ribs. A reflection of her own cheekbones, her father's eyes as she remembers them from the soft edges of childhood. The world tilts, then steadies. Ma chérie, the woman says, the French falling from her tongue like a song long kept. She doesn't ask a question. She simply opens her arms. What happens next is not spectacle. It is ordinary and therefore holy. There is tea that steams in chipped mugs, the scent of peat and sugar and rain drying off wool. There are hands that tremble when they touch and then learn not to tremble. There are stories told out of order because grief shuffled the pages long ago. Sophie learns what was hidden to keep her safe. That the night of masks she saw as a girl was not depravity but ceremony. That her family did not vanish but stepped behind a curtain of guardianship and waited for the day it would be safe to step back out. She learns that Jacques Saunière bore the loneliness of that waiting so she would not have to. That every riddle was a tether thrown across years to find her again. Robert does what the living do in the presence of reunions. He becomes quiet. He stands at the window and watches sun find the wet hedge, sees his reflection waver in the old glass, and feels the peculiar lightness that arrives when a burden you could only witness is finally set down by the one who carried it. When Sophie looks up from her grandmother's embrace, her eyes are swollen and new. She crosses the room and takes Robert's hands. "Stay," she says, meaning an hour, a day, the hope of something after storms. He smiles, and in that smile is gratitude and the ache of a road that still calls. They walk together to the chapel gate. The grass whispers at their calves. The sky is turning a more decisive blue. "I'll be here a while," she says, and the words carry peace rather than apology. "There's too much to learn, and maybe too much to unlearn." "You're exactly where your grandfather wanted you to be," Robert answers. "Not at the end of a treasure map, at the beginning of a life that knows what it carries. They do not make promises they cannot keep. They exchange numbers, a cheek brushed in farewell that lingers like the aftertaste of honey. And then he is in the hired car, and then he is at a small airport, and then the green of Scotland folds into the gray quilt of clouds. On the flight south he sleeps in restless stitches, dreams full of spirals and roses, stone pillars turning like trees, and a woman's steady gaze that feels older than any story. Paris receives him with a gentler sky than the one he fled. The city is different in daylight, even when the glass reflects clouds. The kind of different that comes when you have learned the rooms behind the rooms. He walks, because walking is how he thinks. Across the Pont des Arts, where the Seine carries light like a slow-breathing animal. Along the line of old streets that know his shoes. He does not mean to go back to the beginning, but his feet know before he does. The Louvre rises ahead, glass pyramids angled like facets of a daydream. He stands in the plaza and hears only water and wind. Tourists swarm at the far edges, their chatter muffled by distance. In the center, the Great Pyramid throws down a geometry of shadow, and beneath it the inverted one hangs like a thought turned inside out, a glass icicle pointing into earth. The memory of Saunier's body of neon and alarms tries to surface. He lets it pass. He has brought something new to this place. The knowledge that secrets can be both dangerous and medicinal, that they can be protected by guardians and misused by zealots, that sometimes the right ending for a mystery is not revelation but reverence. He descends the steps toward the inverted pyramid, the air cooling as he goes. The floor is polished to a quiet mirror. At the point where glass almost kisses stone sits a small, unimposing marble pyramid, its top worn soft by thousands of glancing hands. Tour guides have a dozen tidy facts about this arrangement. Robert has 1,000 untidy questions. He does not kneel to stone as if stone were sacred. He kneels because every human gesture needs a shape. And this is the shape gratitude takes when it has no language that won't cheapen what it wishes to honor. Beneath the hush, a current moves. The imagination's certainty that below these geometric hearts of glass and marble, tucked where guards do not look and cameras cannot see, rests a sarcophagus whose occupant is not a legend, but a woman who lived, laughed, wept, loved, and carried forward a story men later tried to own. Whether the sarcophagus is literal or only the mind's cathedral does not matter. What matters is that the sacred does not disappear when you hide it. It changes rooms. What matters is that he can feel the line from Rosslyn to here like a thread drawn under his palm. He closes his eyes not to pray to an answer, but to listen to a question. The city breathes above him. The world goes about its clatter. Somewhere north, in a chapel of carved vines, a young woman is learning her family the way one learns a language that was always in the mouth but never spoken aloud. Somewhere else, a police captain is writing a report that will say less than it knows. Somewhere, a brilliant man sits in a cell and argues with walls. Stories continue. The point is not to stop them. The point is to carry them with care. Robert opens his eyes. The glass above him catches a sliver of sun and throws it down, a thin blade of light that lands across the small marble pyramid like a benediction. He thinks of words he has said in lecture halls and now believes with a tenderness he did not know he possessed. That symbols are bridges between people who never meet. That art is how we argue across centuries without shouting. That truth and myth are siblings who borrow each other's clothes. He thinks of Sophie's voice beside the apprentice pillar saying, "Magdalene," and of the way a single word can open more than a lock. He rises. There is no ceremony to leave behind, no relic to pocket, no headline to summon. Only a man walking back up the steps into daylight, a little humbler, a little more awake to the company of ghosts that make a city feel alive. In the plaza, he pauses and sends a message that will cross seas and land in a small stone cottage. You're safe. I'm grateful. Call when you're ready. He hits send and feels, absurdly and completely, like a pilgrim released from the need to arrive. The Louvre glitters behind him as he blends into the living river of Paris. Somewhere, beneath glass that keeps the rain out and lets the stars in, something sleeps that is not sleeping. It is kept, not by locks, but by the promise of those who remember. And if you pressed your ear to the floor, if you listened harder than the city's noise, you might hear what Robert imagines he hears. The quietest pulse, the sacred feminine beating beneath our feet like the memory of a world before power learned to speak louder than love. The day goes on. People take photographs, lovers quarrel and then don't. Children feed crumbs to impatient pigeons. Above it all, the pyramids cut clean vows into the sky. And somewhere north, a young woman steps out of a chapel into sunlight with her grandmother's hand in hers. Her future no less mysterious than any relic, and no less holy. She is not the Grail. She is simply herself. Somehow that is larger. Robert turns a corner and disappears into the ordinary, which is where all great adventures end when they've done their work. The secret remains. Less a bomb than a candle, less a conquest than a memory. In the space where panic once lived, he finds a quieter thing, trust. Not in institutions, not in proofs, but in the stubborn human impulse to keep what matters alive without needing to own it. He breathes. Paris breathes. Under the glass, the story rests. 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 The story rests.